tonight, Ben is going to do one of these wonderful talks for us on spirits and ancestors and the difference between necessary. So I'll pass the floor over to Ben.
Okay, thank you. Hello everyone. It's been a couple of months since I was last here. I've kind of been moving around the country from Wellingborough to Northampton, so it's nice to be back. Huge difference. So as I was thinking about this talk, so I did write a book on ancestral work a few years ago, and that was a whole process in itself. I thought tonight's talk, I really wanted to talk to you about my actual practices, what I actually practice, as opposed to just coming in and being like, well, some people do this, some people do that. To me, as much as I loved writing that book in that way, for me, I think it would be more impactful for this local community that I'm part of, to really share my journey with ancestral work, particularly as somebody who left the land of his ancestors for 30 years and then came back. So that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. It's going to be a little bit all over the place, so do forgive, but I hope that there is enough in here for interest. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about two traditions that I've been very pleased to be part of, two traditions that really informed my practice and form the bedrock of my practice. I know a couple of you are knowledgeable on ATRs and Caribbean traditions and southern US traditions, so this might not be new to you. For many people, I think these will be new. The Lukumi and espiritismo community over here is not huge, and it's still a very unknown tradition over here. So to start out, if you don't really know who I am, so I am originally from North Wales. I came over back to England 6 months ago now, and I spent 30 years in Canada. The reason I came to Northamptonshire were I had a couple of friends, you all know them, but also because I wanted to be central so I can move around. And what was weird for me was moving to this area. I had never been in Northamptonshire before, and it's been a bit of a journey to connect with the landscape here and the energy of the crossroads in this region, because, of course, my ancestors are, well, I say, of course, my ancestors are all northern. My old ancestors are Norfolk, so my last name is Stimpson. That's the homeland of the Stimpsons, Norfolk, and a lot of my family come from Ireland and Scotland and other places. So nowhere here. So it was kind of an interesting thing to come to this landscape that I didn't have a connection with, but also to find that connection. So my journey with ancestor work has been a lifelong thing. When I moved, I was of course disconnected from my ancestors. I didn't have access to the physical spaces that I could go to, whether it be the graveyards that my ancestors are buried in or the places that they lived. And so ancestor work and the stories of the ancestors was very much a family tradition of stories, right? You know, your gran did this, your grandfather did that, da-da-da-da-da. So for a long time, I didn't have connection with my ancestors, and I pined to come back. And when, as a child, as a teenager, we never came back on holiday. So it was very much in a different place. So in my mid-20s, I'd been practicing paganism ever since I was a teenager. Mid to late 20s, I started to become kind of, I don't want to say attracted, because it really was like a bus it was like being hit by a bus. Synchronicities started to form, and I was suddenly in the presence of my godfather in the Lukumi tradition. I'll tell you more about the Lukumi tradition coming up, but suddenly I was in kind of the orbit of this man who would become very important in my spiritual life. Ended up moving in with him eventually as a roommate, and then studying while I was studying psychotherapy. And there were all these weird synchronicities, and he really jump-started my connection with the ancestors again. So, does anybody, just by hands, have people heard of espiritismo or Lukumi or Santeria before? Yeah? Okay. So a couple of people, I know you. Lukumi, Santeria, Santeria is the wrong word for it, but proper parlance is Lukumi or Regla de Ocha, way of the royals. Santeria, as people often know it. Sometimes people call it voodoo. That's not right. Voodoo is a different tradition, but it's part of the family of these traditions. 400 years ago, of course, people in West Africa and the Congo were enslaved, brought over through the Middle Passage to the Caribbean and to North America. And what was lost in North America was retained in Caribbean, and particularly Catholic Caribbean countries. So you had large communities of freed slaves. So that's something that wasn't happening in North America. Eventually, if you were enslaved in Yoruba land or West Africa or in Congo, on the Congolese coast, you could eventually free yourself and form community. And the politics of Yoruba land at that time, and this is a hidden history, this is not something that a lot of white people know about, but there was a shift within Yoruba land. Yoruba land is the kind of the west of Nigeria and going into Benin. It's next to Igbo land, two very different but somewhat connected communities. And there was a power struggle between the priests of the Orisha, these are Oshun, Shango, Ochosi, Yemaya, and the priesthood of Olofin, of Olorun. And the Babalaos, they're called Babalaos, they were wanting dominance, and so they were going out and intentionally capturing the priests and priestesses of the other Orishas and sending them off to the New World. So you had a lot of priests of the Orishas arriving in the Caribbean countries and in North America. And in the Caribbean countries, enough of them were able to to collect that these traditions were able to thrive. Same in Brazil, in Bahia, in Brazil, the traditions continued, and they're known as candomblé or umbanda or quimbanda, right? So you have this family of diasporic traditions, all of them related, all of them based on the original Yoruba traditions, and this is where Lukumi fits in. Lukumi is the Cuban version or tradition of this. Now, what was happening at this time was a lot of things were lost. In Cuba particularly, they're called the great mothers of the tradition. There were 4 or 5 major priestesses set in various parts of the country, and they formulated a rule set. They gathered the people together. This was in the late 1700s, early 1800s. They gathered the people together. They initiated new priests. They continued as much as they could to allow these traditions to continue. There were very particular ways that these traditions had to be continued, and they really preserved the tradition in Cuba. They then started to migrate in the 1930s up to North America through the Cuban diaspora, and suddenly you had Olorishas or Santeros in the Bronx and in Miami and Hialeah in Florida, right? So what was lost, however, was a lot of the ancestral traditions, because the ancestral traditions of many West African traditions are based in the land. Just as I don't want to call them deities, the Orisha are not deities, they are kind of diffused spirits of the landscape. They literally are the personification of the river, of fire, of the volcano. They're not archetypes in that way, they literally are those things. What was lost, however, was the ancestral traditions. So in Lukumi, Santeria, many of the Orisha traditions, they're called egun traditions, E-G-U-N. And in West Africa, if you go to a lot of the villages and a lot of the holy sites of what's called Isese in Nigeria, you can still find the thriving ancestral practices. There is a whole cult of masked dancers, and it's almost like a clowning society. You might be in a festival, and then suddenly you'll have the ancestors showing up in the form of masked dancers. And they are called the egun cult. And they are there particularly to be kind of adding comedic effect. They're very well respected. Unfortunately, that was not able to be practiced. In the diaspora, you had syncretism. So you often had Orisha tradition being hid behind the saints. And so that's why in Haitian voodoo, in 21 divisions, in Sansei, in Lukumi, and other traditions. You have then the saint statues standing in for Yemaya, Oshun, Shango, and so forth. In West Africa, they didn't need to do that, but in the New World, they did. So what was lost was the egun cult. And so this leads to espiritismo. The traditions were looking for how to fit and fill in this big gap. And espiritismo was their answer. So has anybody heard of spiritism? Spiritism, not spiritualism. That's the Fox sisters up in upstate New York. Spiritism is a tradition that was founded and formulated in the 1860s by a French, originally a French scientist, and his nom de plume was Allan Kardec. And there are now 6 million spiritists around the world. A lot in Brazil. There's 5 million spiritists in Brazil. And Spiritism was his answer to bringing the scientific method to seances. The spiritualism movement had started, theosophy was starting to happen around the 1860s in Europe, of course, and so he was very interested in taking the scientific approach to figuring out what's going on with this. So he formulated a series of ways to test mediums that he was talking to, and eventually he gained enough data to show that this mediumship was true, that spirits he was talking to from one medium were showing up in other mediumship seances. And so he formulated this doctrine of spiritism. And he formulated several of these and wrote several books. I have these here. The Spirits book is one of the biggest and major ones, and then the Gospel According to Spiritism. Why this became really important in the Caribbean and in Brazil is because of Catholicism, right? Spiritualism emerges from a very Protestant North American standpoint. They don't believe in reincarnation. They are very Protestant in their way of approach. Spiritism, though, is very Catholic in their way of approach. Allan Kardec was a practicing Catholic. He emerged in that culture. And so it made sense that the Catholic nations around the world is where his missionaries would go to. He didn't have missionaries. They were pamphlets that he was handing out. And in Brazil, particularly, the cult has been a huge, massive thing for centuries. And so it really took root there. There was a lot of interest in, particularly among the white population, in formulating and practicing this. The other traditions say, and you'll have to forgive me, this is historical language that I'm using here. I would never use this in modern parlance, but the so-called mulatto people of mixed heritage, and who were connected in with the Orisha traditions, Kimbanda, Candomblé, and all of those. They saw in Spiritism an approach, and they called it white magic. They saw within it a way of practicing that was very different from their Orisha traditions and other ATRs. And so you see Spiritism come up in Haitian voodoo. They use that in Haitian voodoo as their way of ancestral work. You see it in Cuba, you see it in Puerto Rico, you see it in Brazil, you see it in Venezuela. All throughout that huge area, you see Spiritism being adopted, and the Spanish word for it is espiritismo. So whenever you see espiritismo, it basically just means Spiritism. But of course, the way that it was formulated, the way that it was put out there, it needed to be changed, it needed to be kind of adapted and syncretized to the traditions. And so then you get espiritismo, different forms of espiritismo. In a lot of the Orisha traditions, they started to use it as a way of honoring the ancestors. And then in the 1930s, Babalaos from Nigeria, from Yorubaland, came over to, at first, Brazil, and then into Cuba and Puerto Rico, and started to then share and teach the traditional egun practices. And so now, when you look at the community worldwide, you've got those who are practicing ancestor work through the various spiritismo practices, and then those who are starting to change towards the egun practices. Okay, is everyone with me so far? Yes, okay, good. Sorry, it's been a long time since I've talked about this because I'm so used to being like, well, ancestors are just what you do, right, all of that. So to really give you a sense here of why this is important, again, these are syncretic traditions, and they were highly adaptable, but it was around that time where people were moving around and people were formulating ideas for themselves, and these were traditionalists, right? The earlier people, they wanted to do it right. They wanted to form practices that would fit with what they were doing. And so now we have espiritismo as a family lineage. A lot of this was family lineage. And so there are very particular ways that we would do it, right? The way I was taught in the Ile, the family that I was part of, is the Puerto Rican Misa Blanca tradition, which is white mass. So a lot of the trappings of Catholicism was taken, and we would use that to work with our spirit guides, not our muertos, not with our dead. We have, in my house, we would use the egun system, and I'll describe that. But in Cuban-based houses, they practice something called espiritismo cruzado, and they use that for working with their spirit guides and for their dead and for their ancestors. So depending on where, if you ever happen to go to an Ile or a Spiritismo house, and there are some Ulrishas in England here and Wales. If you ever happen to be invited to an event, you may see that they're a little different, and you can usually tell when you're in the know, you can tell kind of where they fit. But if you're an outsider, it doesn't matter, right? So when working with the dead, each type of espiritismo practice has with it different worldview. Let's talk about then, at least in these traditions, who really are the ancestors, who are the dead, right? So the dead, and the ancestors in particular, there are only two types of ancestors that they work with. I have adapted that to expand that for my practice, but they are only working with lineage ancestors, those of the community, and your biological dead. So in Espiritismo Misa Blanca, how we would set that up is we are only working with our spirit guides through that. And in this worldview, spirit guides cannot be your ancestors. And there's a really good reason for that. So your ancestors, you connected and linked to your biological ancestors, your ancestors have an agenda, and that is the proliferation of life, the proliferation of you as an agent of life, right? You are seen as a very Catholic collectivist way of looking at the world. You are seen as an agent and a link in a chain going back billions of years and going forward, hopefully billions of years, right? So the ancestors want you to be as great and as amazing as best as you can be in order to either have babies or to contribute to the community as a whole, right? That's their agenda. Spirit guides are there, at least in Spiritism, spirit guides are there for your spiritual fulfillment. So they are working, they've been assigned to you somehow, and they are working with you in order to uplift you so that you personally are the best that you can be, right? And so there can't be an agenda there other than it's very focused on you. Spirit guides are not related to you because of that. Spirit guides are, at least in this system, I'm not trying to say this is for all traditions worldwide, but in this system, that designation has to be kept. Now in Cruzado, in Cuba, they would work with their spirit guides and also their dead all in the same way. And oftentimes they see it as if you have a spirit guide, they have a spiritual court system. So there are 7 major spiritual courts, and they're a little problematic, I'm not going to lie. You have the gitanas, the gypsies, you have the madamas. That's a very particular type of kind of house servant that was prolific during colonial times. You have Franciscos, who are Franciscan monks, right? So it's very limited, but it makes sense for the culture. You would have a spirit court of members of those and also then your ancestors all at the same time. In those houses that are changing to egun practices, it's very separate. Your dead and your ancestors are set in one altar, and your boveda is a separate system. So in espiritismo, you have spiritual technology, the altars and the practices of songs, and as I just said, the boveda would be used in espiritismo, and your egun shrine is in Lukumi. Your boveda would usually, and how mine is set up, it's white tablecloth. You have a central large bowl or glass of water that is the receptacle. This is where the Victorian spiritist ideas come in. Very technical. You've got a big receptacle for water. That's where the spirits are coming and hanging out. You then have up to perhaps 7 extra glasses or 7 candles around that. So you start to see it coming almost like a mass. You go into a Catholic church, it's like a mass. You would also have objects connected to your spirit guides. So on my altar, and I can't talk about my main spirit guide very much, and I know this because a medium friend of mine, as I was starting to talk to her, she had no idea I was practicing this. She said, wait. There's a woman and she keeps putting her finger up to her lips to tell you to shut the fuck up. And I'm like, okay, yes, Linda, okay, fine. Yeah. But I have objects connected to them through this practice. I've learned who they are. I've learned who they probably were in life, and so I have objects that are grounding me to them. In pure espiritismo, you would have what are called, you have the seance structure. So you would have mass gatherings of people coming together to visit a group of espiritistas, and they are there to essentially act as a mediumship circle. So they are practicing, their spirit guides come in. These are also possession cults. So possession is happening. I've witnessed it myself, and that's why I knew that this was, I don't want to say I knew it was real, but it felt like it really impacted me. My godfather was possessed by his spirit guide. Several others were possessed by theirs. And so this is where spirit guides act as agents for you. They act as bouncers to make sure that you are not jumped by just errant spirits. So when you're in a group circle, you've got a load of other people there waiting for healing messages from their ancestors. It's not like you're suddenly going to be just jumped by whoever's grandmother and you're going to just start acting out. Your spirit guide's going to come in. They will then converse with those other spirits, and it's a safety measure, right? In egun practice, however, egun practice would be, and it's very particular, this is true for West Africa, Brazil, and also Cuba and other Caribbean islands. It makes a lot more sense for the animist tradition of Lukumi. So we would use something like cascarilla here. So I can pass that around if you want. So cascarilla is one of those things that needed to be developed because they no longer had access to what was in West Africa. In West Africa, the form of chalk that they use is white clay from any of the rivers of the Niger Delta. And it's called egun. And if you go into any African grocery store, you can usually find egun because it's used as a powder for hair. It's used as a powder for cleansings, and it's literally that white clay straight from the Niger River, for example. So in Cuba, they didn't have access to that. So what they did was they created cascarilla, and you see these sold at botanicas and other places, and it's crushed shells, and it's prepared, and prayers are said over it, and we use this for markings on the body. We use this in our sacred baths that we do, and we also use it for marking on the ground. So what we would do is we would go to the back door usually. We would place a semicircle on the ground, and we would bisect that with 9 dashes. 9 is a holy number of death. It's a number of the Orisha Oya. And that would then serve as the receptacle. That's the ancestor shrine. In West Africa, you often see big, elaborate shrines like this. In Brazil and Cuba, you can usually tell because of the bisected line, but you also see a stick that's lovely. Beadwork is a huge part of this tradition. So one of the reasons that we would start our shrine is our godparents would take us out in the woods. We would find ourselves our ancestor stick and bead it. We would blood it. So this is an animal sacrifice tradition, and that blood feeds then that egun stick, and then that becomes a live egun shrine. We then continually go to them to prayer. We offer them food. We offer them very particular offerings that are, at least in the tradition here, relevant to the Middle Passage. We offer them water with molasses to represent the sugar cane that they had and was forced to cultivate in the fields. We offer them rum or some sort of strong liquor, and that's to invigorate them. We offer them white wine or white spirit, and white in these traditions are a symbol of holiness, a symbol of purity. I'm wearing all white today. This is what I would normally do if I'm doing espiritismo work. And we then offer them a spoonful of everything that we cook and place it into the shrine. This is where we would do our communing. Now, it's a beautiful part of a tradition, but there are dangers. In this worldview, the ancestors and the dead in general are understood to be dangerous if they cross the boundary of life. Right? Most African traditions, most traditions worldwide are about life. Right? The spirits and the deities and other forms of spirit, they're usually connected to life, unless you're talking about like Santisa Muerte or other death deities or death spirits. The Orishas have an aversion to death. They will turn their backs on it and they will flee. They will not tolerate anything connected to death in their area. So this is why the egun shrine has to be at the back door. Oftentimes in Africa and in Brazil, you'll have the egun shrine way out even in the yard. And that is to keep that balance of life and death away. This is really important. So these traditions are very gender binary. There are very strict rules in these traditional cultures, right? It would be dangerous and inappropriate for a pregnant woman to go to an egun shrine because there's a fear there that an ancestral spirit or dead spirit might jump into the body of a baby, possess it, and then live again. Right? There are tons of stories of this and fears around this. So there's whole protocols. I mean, considering the tradition hasn't been around for 100 years, it's very elaborate, but it makes sense to the tradition that and the culture that it's coming from. Let's see here. So how do we then work with the dead in this way? The dead are there for, again, the dead and our ancestors, because in the shrines are both. Community events might include the ancestors of people. They might also include the ancestors of anybody who happened to come in and wander out. That's really their receptacle. The dead are there primarily to assist us, right? So in my book, I was really heavily trying to get that across. The dead is a relationship, right? The dead are not gone, they are around us. That's why we place the offerings on the floor, because they are believed to dwell in the landscape, but they're always around us, they're always there. We are preparing for death. That's what our spirit guides are really there to help us with, is to prepare us to be the best sort of dead person that we can be, right? Now, we in the West don't like to think about death, but in a lot of traditions and a lot of cultures around the world, death's everywhere. You can't escape it, right? And you know, especially in certain times in history where you might not have food to eat from day to day, death is always a living presence. That's why the Orishas are there to help, because they are of life, right? So again, protocols developed. And it's to form that relationship. And what's really fascinating is that depending upon kind of where you are and which island you go to, it's the same type of relationship being cultivated, just in a different way. So in North America right now, there's a whole mixture You have lineages that are practicing cruzado, you have lineages that are practicing misa blanca, practicing egun, practicing Brazilian tradition, and then some who are just practicing pure spiritism. And so you have some really interesting conversations going on about why certain groups do certain things and this and that, all the other. But if you're in a mixed setting, usually it's always a stripped down process. So in thinking about that, thing about relationship, right? We don't tend to like death. We don't tend to like to think about our own death. We certainly don't like to think about the death of our friends, right? And so we honor them in culturally relevant ways. Westerners are very stripped away and disconnected from our traditions, though, right? The funeral industry has pretty much just come in and, when somebody dies, the body is taken away. The next time you see it, it's either cremated or it's backlit, looking like Tammy Faye Baker, and it's just not great, right? We don't have that understanding of death. But death is not something to be afraid of. And so having this daily practice, and the Egun shrine is not just for Christmas, it's not just for Samhain, it's every day of the year. It really helps to help anchor. And when I started to think of it in this way, specifically as somebody who has been disconnected from my ancestors over here, it started to make a lot more sense. It made them more real. And what made them more real was I went through a year, so I kind of a timeline here, 2017 is when I started to become connected with my padrino, or former padrino, and for about 5 years I was kind of in his life. We're still friends, I love him to bits. It just didn't make sense to initiate with him because he would be in Canada and I would be over here. So I may still initiate into these traditions, but for now I was what's called an aleo. I was like kind of outer court, if you want to call it that. But what made it real for me was when I started to have weird synchronicities happen. And I went through a year of my life where 7 men came back into my life from various periods of my life who I had unfinished business with. And some of these were absolutely bizarre. One of my absolute best friends from university, somebody who I would like, even now if he were to call, I would say, sorry, this talk's over, I'm going to go talk to my friend. Somebody I absolutely love. We had a falling out and we didn't talk for about 7 years. And where I was living at the time was a place called Hamilton, Ontario. It's kind of around the coast from Toronto. And I thought that he was living in Nova Scotia. That's where he's originally from. So as the year went by and these 7 people came back into my life, and I started to have a weird sensation every time, like almost like a ripple effect. It felt like, something's coming, something's on its way. The end of the year, not only did it turn out that the office that I was renting at the time when I was doing my psychotherapy training was the same office building that he was seeing his therapist in, he was seeing the therapist right next door to me. So we were bound to run into each other, right? And we reconnected. And I was gobsmacked. I said to Padrino, Padrino, what is this? He said, no, mijo. He's Cuban, or tries to be Cuban, I should say. He said, no, mijo, it's your ancestors. So we did divination, and we asked the ancestors, was it you? And his Oshun was over in the corner, and he said that she was grinning. And so we did the divination of the ancestors, and the message that came through was, stop living in the past, you don't belong there. Right? All that year was synchronicity after synchronicity after synchronicity. So me going deeply into this work, and at the same time, I was also doing in my psychotherapy program, I was working on something called a genogram. Do people know what genogram is? No? So genogram is a tool used by social workers, doctors, and it's a way of tracking information through generations. In psychotherapy and counselors, we would use this to track things like personality traits, relationship patterns, things like that. Something like, for example, when I did my genogram, my parents were both entrepreneurs. They both grew up in self-made northern families. My grandfather was a self-made plumber. Ironically, the other side was also a plumber. And when I tracked back the stories, on both sides of the family, 5 generations, 6 generations back, the paternal, like the main family was in the workhouse. They dragged themselves out of a workhouse up in Lincoln and up in Rotherham, I believe, and it instilled into the family this sense of you need to be self-made, you need to work hard, don't work for other people, you need to be your own person, right? This came all the way down the family to me. It's caused issues, workaholism and alcoholism and some other issues, major stresses, right? But it was fascinating to see that. So when I started then working with the ancestors through this tradition and also through other things like the Dumb Supper, for example, I was able to verify this. I had a wonderful conversation with my grandfather one day at one of his Dumb Suppers, and we really bonded over that experience. And so the dead, for me, no longer are just in the ground and disappear. They're not archetypes. They're very real to me. And I know they're real to me because I can go to them and using my divination practices at my boveda, I can have a conversation with them, right? But it's also, this is where ancestor work starts to become really intentional, because there are some ancestors that you don't want to have a conversation with. There are some ancestors who are still very much unhealthy. And this is where spiritism and espiritismo really try to work with this. So one of the, as a personal practice, it's a beautiful personal practice. I light candles to the dead. I light candles to my spirit guides and uplift and uplift and uplift. At major events, the candles can be lit for the ancestors. And I can go to my egun shrine and I can pray to all of the collective ancestors for the upliftment of particular ones that I know are problematic, right? These are healing traditions. These are trying to get people's spirits who, whether you're dead or alive, into the healthiest place that you can be, right? And so that work has been really, really powerful to work on some of those generational traumas that I was able to detect in my own life, going back 5 generations, probably even more than that. And in truth, that's why these traditions work so well and are so loved in these various countries, because of the generational traumas of the people these traditions come from, right? The reason we give very particular offerings to the ancestors are to soothe them and cool them down because of their anger of the Middle Passage and slavery, right? People seen American Gods? Yes? Yeah, so the scene where Anansi comes and speaks to the slaves, right? That sort of energy and feeling of the dead, particularly the dead who are stuck in that purgatory, is hot. It is angry. And in certain traditions like voodoo, right, you've got Loa who will, and I don't want to scare anybody here, but I think it's true to say there are certain Loa who were historical people and they elevated themselves to become Loa, and they will stab white people when they see them in possession. La Marionnette, for example, people, and it always makes me, not giggle, but always makes my eyes roll when people who are not in these traditions start to worship some of these Loa and the Orisha, not really knowing what they are. And one guy I watched was very connected with La Marionnette, and he was like Scottish from the middle of nowhere up in Scotland, Glasgow. Well, Glasgow's not in the middle of nowhere, but like he had no clue that spirit is still very hot towards white people and oppressors, right? It takes a lot of water to cool her down when she comes into possession. But anyways, that's not my tradition I follow. I just know because of friends who are in it. So healing here, ancestral healing, is really about that relationship piece. And so through these traditions, I was able to gain a foundation in the same way that people, 100 years ago, 200, 150 years ago, were able to gain this foundation. And so, it has really helped my life, and it's become a really important way that I work. But then thinking about how do I, and this has been a struggle for me, how do I then connect that with my British ancestors, right? So I still use the basic way of espiritismo to work with my spirit guides, and then egun shrine to work with my ancestors. Both very different forms of working with the dead, both very different forms of dead, but I needed to switch it, right? My ancestors are typical Little Englanders, right? I think of my grandmother who looked like Queen Mum, right? She was She was quite a woman. She was quite a woman. She loved her tea. She was one of the first betting shop owners, female betting shop owners in the country. And she stood outside the court up in, I can't think where it was now, Sheffield or somewhere like that, and stood outside for like 5 hours until the judge would, the magistrate would give her a betting shop license. So, you know, really fiery woman, really like total feminist. I love her and loved her and love her. But she's not African. She has no connection with the Caribbean. She has no connection with these offerings. So of course, part of that then is building that relationship with those ancestors, figuring out what new offerings I can add, as opposed to just the basic ones that are traditional, right? And this is where then understanding my family come in, right? There's a family recipe for cheese curd that is, or lemon curd, I should say. And so that becomes one of my standard offerings now, when I'm able to make it, right? When I'm not like living in a house share in the middle of Northampton. I can offer that to my ancestors on the one side, my ancestors on the other side, and it's accepted. I think about some of the, again, these are traditions that are not just for once a year. The veil idea doesn't exist in these traditions. The ancestors are accessible all the time. So I can go and I can offer them a cream tea, or I can make the, you know, the hot pot that my gran used to make, right? I might add a little more salt because she didn't know how to cook with salt, but it's something that I can offer that is very relevant to here. I can actually go to those places now that I'm over here. I can go to the field that their ashes were scattered. I can light a candle. I can take with me a small boveda, and I can work with them in that way. Or I can offer them things in the field, right? What I love about these traditions is that they're very home-based traditions. And that is historical, right? You're in a situation where you didn't have access to the graveyards. You didn't have access to the original land of the ancestors, so it becomes a home-based tradition, right? In the South, hoodoo, for example, in the South in the States, they and Southern Conjure, because the graveyards were the central place that a lot of slaves could go, right? And that is often the record of the people, both slaves and ex-slaves and their descendants. That becomes the record place. You find a lot of connection with like graveyard work and graveyard dust and going to the graveyard, very Catholic way of approach here, and celebrating the Day of the Dead and celebrating the dead in that space. Whereas in the Caribbean, that didn't really happen, right? So the dead were always around, they're in the home, they're invited back into the home. There are some safeguards, of course, right? We don't tend to light a candle for people who have just died. There needs to be a little bit of that prolonged time where they're just resting. And actually, if you go onto Netflix, there's some beautiful spiritist movies out there. One is a biopic of Allan Kardec, and they did like green screen, so it looks a bit weird sometimes. So if you go onto Netflix, you can find it. There's another one called The City of Light. And there's this idea that when the soul passes on to the City of Light, there's a hospital that they stay in for a while, right? It's very classic, cheesy kind of spiritist, you know, all love of light, right? But in espiritismo, the same process happens. So there's the traditions. They have these safeguards. They have these ideas. They have these practices, and I'm still struggling with how to integrate them into my British traditions. But it's working. The ancestors seem to be happy. The ancestors, my ancestors, were a little weird at times, but they, like spirit guides, they ascribe to what you're working with. So with espiritismo, a lot of the prayers that we say are Catholic prayers. We open up a seance with Hail Mary and Our Father. That is to raise the energy, right? Anybody who's in the know will know exactly what's happening when you see this. And I can post a video, and it's quite a famous video. It's from the 1970s, and it follows a short little 10-minute, 15-minute documentary on Donna Julia, a woman named Julia. And a lot of younger spiritistas will watch this and be like, expect that, you know, the seances are going to be crazy with like, you know, like possessed people running around screaming and shouting, and who and doing all sorts of things. That's not what's supposed to happen, but they think it does. But it really does show you kind of what that living culture is, right? Versus what the individual practice is. So I'm still struggling with that, but now I'm over here and I'm starting to settle and I'm starting to connect with the land here. More things are coming to me. So that's it. I have nothing else. I think I've twatted on too much. So, so I'll open up for some questions, if anybody has any questions.
I've got a couple.
Go on. Go on, Mikey.
You said you're a spirit guide, but then you said about who they are in life. So you don't know these people at all?
No.
So they've just come to you?
Yeah.
Okay. So, okay. But then you said that they, in your traditions or in the traditions, people are wary of death. So why do you let these spirit guides come to you if you're scared of death?
So
in that sort of made me confused a little bit. But then also you said about like you put it outside the yard or the back garden or whatever and draw the semicircle and you keep it away from you. But then you welcome these spirit guides or you welcome your ancestors in. But if you're scared of something, isn't it you don't want to keep them in? You want to.
It's a good question. No, it totally it makes sense, right?
I wanted to sort of clarify why were you really scared, but then you're still going, oh, come in, say hello.
This is the thing. So with like even now in the New Age, right? Like so, espiritismo and spiritism emerged around the same time that the kind of the earlier traditions that eventually would come into our New Age would come in. So there is a cognitive dissonance there, I won't lie, but it is this sense that spirit guides are elevated, right? They are purer spirits because they've gone through a process where they've kind of gone through the process of training to become a spirit guide, and they've chosen you for a particular reason. Right. So this idea that we always have angels or guides around us all the time is very present in that tradition. The dead, however, are the known dead, right? They're, and this is again a worldwide thing. These are granny who we know died 2 years ago. We don't want them to come back and cause disease. We don't want them to come back and cause issues. We don't want, the matriarch of the family. We don't want dowager countess to come back and start. Well, maybe, but like there's a new normal, right? They're on the other side of death. Espiritismo, like spirit guides. They are dead, but they are they have a purpose. It's like guardian angels in that way, right? Versus the dead who they're supposed to stay dead. Spirit guides are never trying to take over you. They're never trying to live life again. They've gone through a purified process, and they're in your life whether you know it or not, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Could this be our understanding? Like a Western, our culture, how we understand death, how you'll stand that.
Well,
it's not.
Yeah, it is. It's a
definition of it, right?
Well, I mean,
it's like bad for us. People die. We see it as bad, but it's not that way.
Well, I mean, worldwide, I would say everybody in the world knows that death is bad for us, but it's more visible to most cultures around the world, right? In our culture, we don't really know what death actually is. And it causes a lot of confusion for us. Yes, like look at like casualty, for example. We have that in our head that, final moments of death are beep, 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 beep. And that's not true for most deaths. Most deaths happen at night. Most deaths happen when somebody is asleep. Death is a prolonged thing, or it's a very immediate, very bloody, very gory thing. But we don't necessarily see that. Our culture really stops us from experiencing that.
Funny, I saw a meme the other day that kind of said, funerals are like a celebration. You never get that when you come in, though. When people are born, you never really have that same sort of celebration of life.
Oh, come on, Josh, you were celebrated when you came in.
Not. I definitely wasn't. But it just makes me think of this. There's less emphasis on dead as we know dead or death. It's, like you say, an elevation. They're guides.
We don't know when they died. That's the thing, exactly. Right? So in these traditions, right, it's this idea that when you come into the world, you already have these guides with you, coming along with you, right? So whereas the dead are, we know they were living, then they died, we don't know where they've gone. That causes us a lot of that confusion, right? Yeah. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, but I've got loads more. But
okay, yes.
How do you or does it occur if there's ever a conflict or a clash of advices between one set of
Good question.
ancestral traditions and another set of ancestral traditions? Is there ever conflict or clash, and if there is, how do you deal with that?
This is a good question, right? So, people, historically speaking, most people's ancestors came from the same geographic area, and it was only over the past 400 years that you started to get a lot of mixture and a lot of that, right? Certainly you have those ancestral traumas where different groups of ancestors will not mix, right? And then, so I'll give you a good example, right?
Wales and Africa are two different climates.
Very
climate,
yes.
One's going to advise you to take a scarf, one's going to advise you to take a hat.
Right. But that's a very specific thing, right? But it's, it comes down to, it comes down to that understanding of where you're at. But I'll give you another example. So my pagan community that I come from, Tribal Hearth in Canada, I was part of it for 10 years. They were my people, right? One of the elders of that was a woman who had Irish and Anishinaabe heritage. And she was a powerhouse. She was she is, I would say. She is a powerhouse. I love her to bits. And one of the greatest lessons that helped me, I was sat around a campfire at one of our camps one year. It was very early on when I was in. She said she was talking about how when she goes to her ancestors, she has to be very particular about what she's offering and to who. Because in her Irish heritage, alcohol is community creating, right? People come together, like in English culture, right? We all go to the pub, it's a beautiful place, we all hang out, that's the hub of the community. In Anishinaabe culture, alcohol was poison. So for her to offer, alcohol to her Anishinaabe ancestors.
That's exactly what I'm asking.
Yeah. This is where relationship really comes in, to know that nuance, right? I've never experienced my ancestors. Well, my ancestors in biology are all from over here, right? So I probably need to go and get myself a new scarf and hat, right? But the African ancestors were of lineage. They were of the community, right? They didn't care what I wore. They just wanted to make sure that I was integrating and also knowing my place, knowing my privilege in that space, right? So it was very, very important. But they welcomed me in. The things that I experienced were just beautiful, but they didn't get down to that nitty-gritty, right? Yeah.
So did you have African?
No.
None.
No. Well, probably about 2,000 years ago. Yeah, that I know of. Yeah. Yeah. But these traditions are, and again, you'll have to forgive my terminology here. It's the best way that we can describe it. They're tribal traditions, right? So initiation or becoming part of these communities is initiation into the tribe, right? So when somebody goes through the process of becoming an Olarisha, they are literally, how can I say this without giving away something? Their old selves are killed and they are reborn in that tradition as a member of that tribe. They're given a tribal name. So a lot of priest names tend to be, exactly, right? And at that point then, they are part of the tribe. They are Lukumi, right? And that's for many of the ATRs. And with espiritismo, you started to see traditions of initiation similar to that. So in some houses, you would go and you would have your crowning, I guess is the best way to translate it, in espiritismo. So that's when your spirit guides are kind of firmly planted into you, in the same way that when you initiate into Lukumi, your Orisha is crowned onto your head. So, or like when your Loa are cut or scratched, they're placed into your body, you become the temple of that spirit. So, yeah. Again, trying not to give too much away. Yeah.
You talk about the relationship with death.
Mm-hmm.
I think the issue in the West is that death is very, very, or at least the physical death of the body is very sanitized.
Yes, it is.
The whole thing sort of happens behind closed doors, and
it is.
as you say, the body is immediately whisked away and fettled up and boxed up and
Curtains are drawn.
Exactly.
We don't, unless you're working in an environment, as I've done, where you can be, frequently confronted with death, then, you know, death is something that other
Yes.
to our experience.
Very much so. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, Chris stated that it's very, it's like a corporation takes over your report
Yes.
of death, and the family involvement is removed from you.
Whereas traditionally, right, we as a Catholic nation at one point, and then the Protestant nation after that, you know, death was in the home, right? We would bathe and we would treat and we would have wakes in the home. And that was all over the world, same in Europe, right? And then starting with in the 1800s, we start the funeral industry and they really took that over. And you get that sanitization, as you said, Woody, right? Where suddenly we see the dead body as, ooh, that's icky, right? Whereas you go to most other places around the world, you're going to see dead bodies you're going to see death. You're going to see the reality of death.
Maybe in Western culture we lost that with the loss of the village wise woman.
I would.
Job it was. You don't believe?
No, I would totally disagree with that, honestly, because the cunning folk were never about that, and the wise women were never about that. It was always the family, right? So, and I say that specifically because I've just completed 3 big books on cunning folk. But that's kind of a modern myth of the wise woman, is that they were there to tend to. It was the family, because that was part of our culture, right? Even up until, because we didn't have anywhere else, there was no other space except for the churches to take the dead. And so wakes were often in the house, right? It was the duty of the firstborn children to wash the body, to take care of it. The local vicar or the local wise person would come over and do, you know, work. And then it was off to the church, and it was that procession, right? And so I feel like this is where, and why I disagree with you so much there is because the funeral industry didn't take that away from the wise woman, it took it away from the family. And because it took away that duty from the family, we've lost that connection to death, right?
I was thinking more sort of pre the church being all sort of encompassing as it became, you know, everything was processed through the church. You know, is it not a case of saying that pre-church,
Way back.
you know, way back, the culture of you know, the wise woman, the cunning woman, was about births, healings, you know, sitting with the dying, the rituals for the dead.
Right.
It's certainly, you know,
Right.
the kind of stuff that I have read now. If you know, if you're going to say
In my family as well.
you have an alternative perspective on that, you know.
Well, I mean, I think it would depend on where we're talking about. I think that's a whole other discussion. But like, you know, if we go back further enough, like 800, 900 years, it would have been still within the family. But again, that continuation, I would say, continues all the way through. That the family would have been doing the basic prep and taking care of the body, and then whoever came in to do the rites, right? Whether that be the wise women or the local vicar or the priest, right? But I think like again, that's a whole other conversation. But I would say that I would still disagree with the notion because historically, again, by the time the funeral industry removed that from us, all the way up until the mid-1800s, we were still being tended to by our families, right? And yeah, so, you know.
You can still now tend to your dead.
Yes.
It's not completely removed from
It
you,
isn't,
it's
no.
choice.
Yes.
And it tends to be the choice of the person dying
Yes.
as to what they want.
Yeah.
And the biggest gap, like you're saying about the funeral people taking it away from us, it's more the case of our dying and recognising that in this day and age, there is no time. We do not have the time to dedicate to our dead, which we used to have.
Yeah.
And that's a very sad thing.
It is,
And
yeah.
that going through the generations as time's getting busier,
Yeah.
you're right in saying that the dead looked at it and go, oh, no, don't want to deal with that.
Yeah.
But again, it's still alive.
It is, and it is still alive. There are options, but how many people know that, right? That's the question. Yeah.
Knowledge is power. If
Yes.
you want to be a part and keep certain traditions alive, you need to know.
Exactly.
And if you don't want to know,
Yeah.
you can't complain.
Exactly. Exactly. And I mean, that's a really good point right there about that, you know, again, it's that generational cycle, that generational change, right? So what started with it just became easier, or what started with the funeral industry coming in, this is a service we can provide. Originally the funeral...
Most people nowadays just think it's standard, isn't it? That if like...
It's true. Well, you think about...
You can't even joke so actually thinks about it, you know, well,
Yeah.
there's an alternative.
Yes.
When I was working on the council wards in Leeds, and we'd go in every morning, there'd be deaths through the night with various denominations, religions, peoples. And I hate to put it in this way, but it was this way. The people of this country would come in and go, oh, that's who we're dealing with. Deal with it later. And they'll be carted off and dealt with via the agencies.
Yes.
We had a beautiful Sikh family come in, and we put the body into a side room, so it was their time, their space. Out came the rose water, the joss sticks. We allowed them to do whatever it is they felt they needed to do, but oh my gosh, the water smelled amazing.
Yeah.
I had
It was
beautiful
beautiful.
experienced this a couple of years ago, because my partner's brother.
So, is he okay? You're right, was he?
Yeah.
So my partner's brother passed away. He had terminal cancer, and his wife didn't want him to be in the hospital. She insisted that she would take care of him till the end. So he was like, the last few weeks, he was like in the living room, sat in bed, and she was like, you know, some carers would come in, you know, a bit of respite, but mainly it was, you know, the wife that done the most of it. Anyway, so when he eventually passed away, we got a call early in the morning, and we all gathered around the house, and for some reason, she had never organised with a funeral director, organised anything when the day came. So we were there for about 5 hours with, you know, with the body, and it was the most, I can't describe it. We lit candles, played music, and there was this almost like a calmness. You know, it was the first time I'd actually spent that amount of time with the dead body. And I thought I'd be like freaked out by it, but there was a calm. I can't describe it. Almost kind of like it was it was an experience.
It was an experience.
I think the thing like what.
Yeah, and it was just like something. It's just.
It's a very profound
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like saying that it's been taken away from us. It's been so drilled into us that the moment someone passes, a funeral company will come in and take over. Do you know, I mean, I went to a funeral of one of my friends the other day. You know, and it was just like a conveyor belt. Do you know what I mean? It was just.
No, especially crematorium.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
They're shipping you out the door.
I know, yeah. You know, the persons are queuing up. Do you know what I mean? I couldn't get my head around that.
They say in life you get 10 minutes to be famous.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's it, it's like,
Yeah.
Even with, sort of when you look at, like, with employment, isn't it, the whole culture, they'll give you 2 weeks paternity leave.
It's,
or
I know,
you
right?
get a year maternity leave, you get 2 days for somebody passing, and that's it, isn't it?
Still a guest.
Still a guest,
No, I'm just going to shout out. I'm a celebrant. I mainly do weddings, but I also do funerals. And I was really quite blessed that one of my first funerary jobs, requests, whereas a living wake, the woman, the client, it's still very much alive, still with us this day, but she wanted her funeral. So, because what she actually wanted was the opposite. She wants, when she walks in the other world, she wants to just go quietly. She doesn't want the fuss. But we did a living wake for her. So we went through the whole process. Family came in, all the colours they was asked to come in. She hired a carriage instead of a hearse, and but she had a ride round on it, and it was a wonderful, weird but wonderful day. Incredibly difficult to write. Normally I don't get the backwards and forwards. I get the is this okay, yes or no. Well, I've got the backwards and forwards with the client, which is weird.
Yes.
Because the client's not supposed to be there.
Yeah.
But I'm very, very blessed to experience that.
Yes.
And then later on, because she's still with us,
Yes.
she's still a member of our circle and very much loved and very healthy. She's really healthy, isn't she? But afterwards, I'm talking 6 months, a year, a good time after, I'm still in contact with the family because of location, and then members of our circle too. They all got their, not their moment, but they felt a deeper connection, not just with our friend or my client, but in general, that they found some sort of similar type connection.
Yes.
And it was a real blessing to be part of that.
I think that's a really, to kind of end off the talk, that is what we're really getting at with ancestor work versus funerals, right? Funerals are about that passage, getting the person to where they need to go, right? Ancestor work is that. Funerals are for the living, yes, but there's also, I mean, you know what I mean. Whereas ancestor work is that continued relationship, right? We have Dick sat with us right now because there's been a place set for him. And hello, Dick, welcome, right? But not welcome back, right? Ancestor work is that continued, everyday, continued relationship. It's just in a different form. You're working and communicating in a different way, however way you decide to do that, or whatever tradition you follow. You know, one of my favorite cultures around the world is the Tarahan people over in Sulawesi, right? They have a tradition that it can take upwards of 20 years to do a funeral, and the body is still in the house, and they refer to the body as still living, right? Grandma is asleep, you know, don't wake grandma. Grandma wasn't hungry, she didn't want this food. When the funeral happens is the moment of release, but the body is taken and the spirit dwells in the necropolis just down the road, right? That's what we're really talking about with this type of work, is that continued relationship after death, instead of death just being this event that happens that we're dreading and we don't really understand, and the body is taken away and it comes back like Tammy Faye, right? It's you know, and then what? We put it in the ground and that's it. Or it's cremated and it's gone. And then how we talk about the dead, they're past. We don't want to talk about them anymore. They're gone, they're somewhere else, right? As opposed to understanding that they're still here with us.
So, just one quick question. So in your tradition, practice, you talk about ancestors. So where are they? Are they everywhere, like you say, or are they just in the plain? Are they...
They're over the hill. They're as close as your nose. They're under our feet, right? Yeah. They are
present.
Very present, right? This is why the shrine becomes a really important focal point. This is the place of communion. It doesn't really matter because it's not for us to know. That's one of the mysteries of life. We don't get to know what death is, right? What we're doing with the shrine is we're putting together a place that they can come to and we can go to and meet, right? Because if we had an answer of where they were, that would eliminate one of the mysteries of life and one of the mysteries of death, right? You know, and I have to believe that is true. I have to believe that boundary is there for a reason. I have to trust that is there, right? You have to live.
Not get so obsessed with what comes next.
Yeah, we don't open a book and go to the back to find out what the mystery is. No, you don't. Well.
It's funner if you know what's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's a journey.
Why are you two sat next to me? So with that, Ragnar, you had one question, didn't you? Or were you okay? So, okay, sorry. I hand it back to the elders. Thank you very much for listening to me go on for an hour. Thank you.